51 Productions, The Artist, show number 60 with Marcia Chatelain, 2855, director Teddy Peters.
The Artists, a series of programs that focuses on art from San Diego's many noted galleries and museums, and profiles the artists as well. Your host for the series is the internationally acclaimed portrait photographer, Tony Gesu.
Hi, I'm Tony Gesu, and welcome again to The Artists. I might say that, no, I can easily say that Martha Chatelain is an artist. Whether she is a sculptor, I don't know. I can't describe that. Whether she is a sculptor of handmade paper, I can't be sure of that either. She does make her own paper and she creates sculpture. One thing is sure, she's an artist. Stay with us and we'll talk again to Martha Chatelain. I'm with Martha Chatelain, Chatelain, no E. Welcome, Martha. I think this is going to be a wonderful program. You know, I started at the introduction. I know you're a sculptor. I know you do handmade paper, and now you've created a work of art of these two processes. Tell about it, because I think it would be good if people understood exactly what we're going to show and what you do.
Well, we make our own handmade paper out of 100% cotton fiber at Maple Creek Studios.
Start with handmade.
Okay.
What is it? Are you using cotton, pure cotton from the plant?
We're using pure cotton that has been pressed into sheets called cotton linters. And the cotton is 100% pure cotton cellulose fiber. And we hydropulp it in a machine that adds water to the pulp, makes it into a pulp, and actually roughs up the fibers so that the fibers are swelled with water.
Okay, let me stop you for a moment. When you say cotton, is it a byproduct, or is it the cotton that we know of, the cotton gin and so on? Is it the pure cotton?
It's the pure cotton right from the cotton plant.
Yes.
And California grows 80% of the cotton, but we don't have the water resources to process it.
All right.
So they ship it to North Carolina or Ohio or somewhere.
Now I understand.
And that way the cotton is used for textiles and thread. The short fibers that are left over are pressed into cotton linters. We buy those linters and we reconstitute those linters into cotton pulp.
By putting it back in water.
Back in water, and that roughs up the fibers, enabling us to make paper where the fibers actually interlock to form a very strong sheet.
It makes them swell, and then you put them together.
It makes the fibers swell, and then when we form a sheet of paper in one of several ways that we do it, the fibers interlock, and that interlocked fiber forms a very, very strong sheet of 100% cotton paper.
Yes. Now, I know when you talk about artists' paper, it's rag bond and whatever, and their goal is to have the purity of the paper that you make.
Exactly. We try for an archival paper that is the neutral pH water and very...
Wait, pH?
You're asking me something about chemistry, and I'm not sure I know about that, but it's not acidic and it's not alkaline, it's neutral, so that the paper will last a long, long time. and it's 100% cotton. There's no acidic
And I
quality
would
to it.
imagine that's hundreds of years, not just 100 or 200. If it's pure cotton paper,
Right.
it would be hundreds and hundreds of years.
Exactly. It's just like 100% rag paper,
Yes.
only instead of making it out of rags, which
Yeah.
is no longer done,
Yeah.
it's made out of 100% cotton fiber.
Yeah.
And what is unique about what we do at Maple Creek Studios, where I have my studio, is we make the paper and we create our own works of art out of the paper that we ourselves have made. We don't buy 100% rag paper and then make
Yes.
a piece of artwork out of it. We make our own paper from scratch, and then we turn that paper into something that we create ourselves. So each artist
Yes.
makes his or her own paper.
Yes. And when you make this paper, they're in sheets. Are they let's start by looking at this. Now this is one sheet of paper, or is it a series of sheets?
That particular piece is assembled from one initial sheet of paper, and that sheet of paper was then sliced with a mat knife right down the middle in kind of a
Yes.
curved way,
Yes.
and then reformed to make these two pieces brought together. And then I incorporated additional sheets of paper
In the back. Yes.
pieces
yes.
I brought back from Japan,
Fascinating.
and then painted on the surface.
Uh-huh.
And
Is
that piece of paper was formed on a vacuum table, not in the traditional way that the Oriental papers are made in a vat. But that piece of paper was formed on a vacuum table, where instead of pressing the water out of the paper with a
You
press,
vacuum it. You suck it out.
suck the water out,
Yeah.
which
Now,
gives you a different texture.
Do you paint these before you incorporate the paper, or is it painted after? When you've gotten all, would this have been all white originally?
Yes, it would have been all white originally. Hmm.
And then
And then
you create your own.
Right, then afterwards I paint on it, or I put glazes on it, or sometimes mica powders, things like that.
Yeah. So that anything goes, whatever your it's restricted to your imagination.
That's right.
Now, you know, I read in one of your reviews that paper was invented by a Chinese courtesan in the year 105 A.D.
Isn't that amazing?
I don't connect the two. I don't know why it should have been a courtesan who invented it. But paper has been in use since then.
That's right.
And that's paper as we know it, the kind of paper that Da Vinci did and Rembrandt used and we used for letters and so on and so on. This is different.
This is different in that the paper itself is used as the medium.
The art has been created, originally the art was created on the paper.
Right.
Now the art is the paper.
The art is created of the paper.
Uh-huh.
Or of papers, a series.
How old is that? Who thought of this marvelous idea? Do you know?
I think it's rather recent, in the last 10 years, certainly here in California. It's very recent. I think the first museum exhibition using paper as the medium and exhibiting works of art that were done that way was in the late 70s in the University of California at Santa Barbara.
And do you think it originated in California? It might have been.
I think it sprang up simultaneously on both coasts, and I believe in Northern California there was a resurgence of interest in the process of making the handmade paper. And then as you are making your own handmade paper, it has got such a wonderful quality. I'm sure that the idea of forming it into something other than a flat sheet came from that. My teacher was Edward Peters, and Ed Peters, who works here in San Diego also, he learned in Santa Cruz in Northern California. He had been a sculptor of welded metal and steel before that, and became fascinated with the process of handmade paper and using it as a sculptural tool. And then he came to San Diego and taught it at the San Diego Academy of Fine Arts when it was still in existence, and also built the equipment at San Diego State University, where he got his master's degree. And I happened to come along in about 1980 on a tour of artist studios of San Diego. And we visited Maple Creek Studio, got a paper making demonstration, and I was utterly fascinated with the process. And also, I had never seen a work of art, a finished work of art, made from paper as a medium. So I signed up for classes, and I've never left. I'm still there.
Now let's drop the subject for a moment and go back to what created this woman who became interested in a unique paper process.
Okay.
All right. You were born in Pasadena. You're one of the rare. You're in the minority now.
I'm a native Californian. That's right.
And what was your child? What was your growth? How was it of an artistic family? How did?
Well, my father was very artistic, and he was a painter, a sign painter for a while, and then became a design engineer and designed aircraft. But he was always a Sunday painter and painted on the weekends. And he helped me see. He helped me learn how to look and how to see things. And I think made me appreciate things in nature. We would go on walks and he would point things out.
You were hooked early on.
I was hooked early on. I certainly was.
What a wonder. Is your father still living?
Yes, he is. In fact, he lives in Pacific Beach and he still body surfs at the age of 72.
That's disgraceful.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah. I do it perhaps 2 weeks of the year when the water is 72.
It's warm enough, right.
And that's marvelous. And he still paints.
He still paints. He does watercolors now, which I think is the most difficult. He's very good. He doesn't exhibit. He doesn't show his work. He gives it away to friends.
He has no problems.
That's true.
That's fabulous. So what happened to you? Tell me. Early on, your father inculcated this love of art.
Absolutely, and I think I also was always a very visually oriented person, and my pleasure was in things I saw.
Yes.
And of course, in school, the one thing I excelled in particularly was art and drawing. So I was always given the task to, design something or make the costumes or...
You're talking about elementary school?
Elementary school.
Elementary school.
And then on up into high school, I was the decorations chairman for the senior prom, those kinds of things. So I got a lot of pleasure out of it, as well as just being visually oriented and enjoying looking at things, seeing things.
What brought you to serious study of art? Did you major in art early on?
Yes, I did. I majored in art at high school. I don't know whether you majored in things in high school. I was in the college preparatory program.
I'm sure you did.
But the art classes had competition that was sponsored by Bullock's Department Store in those days. It was an annual thing. And I won one of the awards for a high school student. And part of the award was a scholarship to Chenard Art Institute. So I went to Chenard Art Institute every Saturday for a year, all during my senior year in high school.
That was the scholarship?
The scholarship.
That was the award?
And they gave an award to one boy and one girl from each high school in the Southern California area. And at that time, Chenard Art Institute to me was just a very magical place. It was where the real artists were, and when you walked in, you just knew you were in an atmosphere of...
the more I hear, the more artists I meet, and the more I hear of Chenard, the more respect I have for it. It must be, if it's not, it was certainly an extraordinary...
It was an extraordinary place. And it was a wonderful thing for a 17-year-old high school student to walk in there and sort of feel a part of it and
Would you say it was similar to the Art Students League in the East?
I imagine that it was.
Yeah.
And it was very small. It wasn't a large school. But just the smell of the oil paint and the feelings of the studios and just feeling like we were part of it.
And the excitement of art.
It was wonderful.
Yeah. Talk about a football player.
Well, in my senior year in high school, I met on a blind date my husband, Don Chatelain. And at that time, he was captain of the football team. And we had a date during Easter week at Balboa Island. And when we came back into the city after spring break, I was walking down the hall one day and kneeling down to get some books out of my locker, and he came along and he said, "Hey, come on, how would you like to be a couple of the week in the school newspaper?" And I didn't like the idea at all, because that meant if that was published in the school newspaper, I was tied down. But he said, "Well, I'm sorry, it's already gone to press. All that remains is for us to have our picture taken." And he dragged me down to the photographer's place, and we had our picture taken. And Don and I have been together since 1952.
And he's still doing it to you.
Still doing it to me, right? He's been extremely supportive of my endeavors in the artistic field all through our marriage. He was the one that would always encourage me to take graduate courses, and when I was too shy to do so, he would go get the applications for graduate school and things like that. So he is very, very helpful and supportive, and
that's wonderful.
Seems to enjoy the fact that I'm having such a good time.
That's great. I understand that he's done something else for you just recently, or was it a little while ago?
Well, he actually...
was a present?
It was a present, He actually, when I was taking classes at Maple Creek Studio, he saw what a good time I was having, and he wanted to know what he could get me for a Christmas present, and he thought up the idea of paying the rent on my studio for a year. And it never occurred to me that I would have a full-time art studio, but I said, well, I'm not sure those people would want me to join them, and he said, well, why don't you ask them? And I did, and they said that would be fine, and so my first year's rent on the studio space at Maple Creek was paid for as my Christmas present.
Isn't it wonderful?
Very
I'm sure
encouraging.
That you've more than earned it, however. You know, you've told me, and I know that I'd like to discuss it. You have 2 girls. You have 2 children.
We have 2 daughters.
And you grew up in Los Angeles, or in the Los Angeles area.
That's right.
And you both did, obviously.
We're both native Californians.
But something happened, and I don't mind talking about Los Angeles smog. That brought you?
That brought us to San Diego, that's right.
Yes.
When our daughters were small, we lived in the Los Angeles basin right up against the mountains in Verdugo Woodlands. And they were both very susceptible to bronchial infections because of the smog. And the pediatrician used to say, well, just have them stay indoors during recess. And it seemed to us a very weird way for a child to grow up not being able to play on the playgrounds.
Yes.
But when they did, they got asthma and bronchitis. So when Don decided to start a new business, in 1968, we decided, well, then why should we stay where it's not healthy for our children to live? So we relocated to San Diego in 1969, and the children's health improved tremendously. They're now 22 and 25,
That's marvelous.
And don't have that problem
Now,
anymore.
you know, it's something that intrigues me so much about you and what you've done. We have a portrait, a self-portrait of you, that you did when you were in your early teens, I think, in your teens.
About 16 years
and
old.
it's quite good. It's quite good. And then you studied at Chouinard. You studied oils and drawing and so on.
Right.
And that was also very good. There's a marvelous progression in your growth. Some of your watercolors are good, some of them were not. But this one, this is very imaginative and kind of precocious, I think. How old were you when you did that?
I was probably about 17 years old.
That's not in any way a self-portrait, is it?
No, it certainly isn't.
But it has an attraction, it has a good look. And so you've done this kind of thing, this pencil drawing, and then I can see the beginnings of great art in your painting. And then you've gone from one, and this must be quite a few years later.
No, actually, that was 1956 when I was a senior in UCLA, when I was about 20 years old. And that was done in Jan Stussey's class. And that was a problem that he gave us to work on, working in a circular format. And the interesting thing is that it was mixed media, using collage and oil enamels and sand and all kinds of things. My recent work in handmade paper sculpture, I've returned to the circle format and have some pieces now.
I understand. But you know, one of the things that intrigues me is that had you stayed with painting, it's an easy life, you know. It's no problem. You have the same creative urge and you have the same creative ability. You might well have been a great painter, which is a lot easier and sure as hell a lot neater than having to grub with the pails and pails of cotton to make your paper. Why?
I can't answer that. It's just that I've always been interested in process. I've always been interested in things that involve some kind of process. For a while I did some things with fabric, and I've done other things that involved, you know, photo silk screening, things like that. So it must be something to do with being interested in the process, as well as just the final application.
Well, let's take a break, and I'll take you back to these paper products. And I'm still not convinced that you shouldn't be a painter.
Maybe I will someday.
I'm sure. We'll be right back. We're back with Martha Chatelain, and I must say, you are an artist and you're a pioneer. This is a new area in art, and I think you've done beautifully. And I think by example, you will have many followers.
We'll have to see about that. I'm not so sure.
Do you think you'd ever be tempted to paint? Are you ever now, as a change from...
I'll tell you, the interesting thing that's happening to me is I'm starting to paint on the paper that I make.
Mm-hmm.
At first I just did pure paper. I'm starting to paint with paper. I'm finding that in the case of some of the landscapes I've done, I'm using paper that I picked up in Japan when I was at the International Paper Conference
Mm-hmm.
last year. And those are different textures of the paper than the paper that I make. And using the papers almost as a pigment in and of itself, or as a paint, so that the paper is collaged and almost used as a paint. So I may be going back toward painting. I don't really know.
Is the paper that you get from Japan, is it different from the paper that's made here, that you make here?
Yes, it's very different. It's a different fiber, and it's a different texture, and they make many, many different kinds of paper. But I brought back a lot of handmade paper from Japan, and I've been incorporating that into my pieces since I
Are
got
these
back.
sheets, rolls,
They're sheets of paper.
how large?
They vary in size from, just 12 by 18 to some of them as big as 58 by 32.
What have you brought with you? What do you have?
I brought back so much paper.
That's wonderful.
They had the International Paper Conference. They had something like 511 delegates from all over the world, and they brought in the paper makers from the different provinces with the samples of their paper, set them up in one of the big department stores in Kyoto, and you could go meet the paper maker and buy his or her paper from the artist themselves.
see.
So and besides they took, a credit card, so it was lucky for me. I bought a lot more paper than I expected
Isn't
to
that
buy.
marvelous?
But I really appreciate
Credit card in Japan, and it's...
I really appreciate the heritage that comes from the Oriental fibers.
Yes.
It's a very tedious process compared to the Western fibers, but I think they work well together, and what I've been doing lately is incorporating some of those Oriental papers with my own paper. And almost when you started talking about me becoming a painter again, I think I'm working back toward that by using the paper as paint.
Yeah. Well, this one behind you is a good example of it, I would imagine.
It is.
Now, you have a title for this.
This one's called Remembered Reflections.
Okay. Would you go beyond that?
Well, it's sort of like reflections of a landscape on a lake.
Yes.
And it's not something that I did from nature, but it's something I remember somewhere in my
And
memory.
in this, your colors are and it is almost a landscape, and it is reflected. It's obvious.
And I think some of the colors are paint and some of them are paper. So there's an incorporation of paint and paper as paint. So there's an ambiguity there that interests me.
Yes. And would you pursue this landscape concept further
I might.
toward reality, or have you?
I haven't
not?
thought about it. I really don't think about what I'm going to do before I do it. I get myself in my studio.
Wait, start again.
I don't plan what I'm going to do before
You
I
start with a sheet? What do you start with if you don't plan?
Well, you start with pulp.
Yes.
Okay, buckets of pulp. And you start with a vacuum table. And in this case, I formed a grid using string. And I laid string down on top of the pulp. And as I was laying the string down, I thought of the landscape idea.
Yeah. Great. You have a lovely catalog here, and I've gone through it, and I see some of the titles. And I think of Russell Forrester, who said that one man asked him, why do you put titles between me and your painting? Some of them I don't quite understand. Obviously, they have meaning for you. What do you think it does to the viewer? Or don't you care?
I care.
All right.
I do. And I've often been tempted to have untitled pieces of artwork.
Yeah.
Sometimes the title comes right away, and sometimes I have to struggle to come up with a title.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what it does for the viewer, but some of them really have special meanings, and some of them are...
Okay. Let's talk about this beautiful thing.
Okay, that piece is called Katani Shrine, and it does have a meaning. There is a shrine in Kyoto called Katani. I was there for the Plum Blossom Festival.
Okay.
And there are some obvious Oriental calligraphy pieces there, and it was
Yes.
spring, and everything was opening up and blossoming. And I think that just was sort of the feeling I was trying to get, not actually depictive of the Katani shrine
Yes,
in any way.
No,
but
I understand.
Just
the feeling is there. Now you say you mentioned something calligraphic. What, for instance?
On the bottom left-hand corner
That
there.
is, it is calligraphy.
It isn't calligraphy.
Could be
It's-
arabesque then.
Could be.
Yeah.
Just sort of a mark that indicates something similar to the Japanese characters, but it is
yes.
not anything
Yeah.
specific.
Now we have one that's been in front of us and on stage that is absolutely beautiful.
Thank you.
Absolutely beautiful.
Thank you.
There you have no color, and you've left it all to us to imagine whatever. Does that have a title?
It has a title.
Tell.
It's called Hansu Rising, or Hasu Rising.
Yes.
It's a lotus blossom,
Uh-huh.
and the rising has to do with the circular shape in the back, which is
Yes.
like the moon.
Yeah. It is absolutely,
Thank you.
absolutely beautiful.
Each of those petals is formed separately,
Uh-huh.
and I used pieces from a palm tree to mold them
Shape.
over that.
Isn't
And then
it?
when they dried, I pulled them off.
That's ingenious.
Mm-hmm.
Now this one, and this is,
That's one of my newest pieces.
you really are progressing, and you are painting.
I am painting and
Yeah.
using the paper as paint and using using some interesting dyes that I've found in the pulp to dye the
Yeah,
pulp.
Yeah.
So there's colored papers and white papers and paint and combination
It
of
is
things.
extraordinarily handsome. Now, I would ask you this then, because the viewer can't tell. Obviously, these behind us are of a size. They're perhaps 30 by 40, something like that. This one we can't tell. This one is perhaps 14 inches square.
Right.
Do you plan to do larger pieces in this vein? Where will you go?
I don't know, Tony. That's a real hard question to answer because
And it's a marvelous answer for a true artist.
Is it?
Yes, because it shows growth. But you don't know.
I don't know.
What do you think?
I think I will continue to work large. I think I feel I can relate to the larger pieces better because I feel in a scale with them almost.
Martha,
one-to-one.
our time is up. Thank you so much. It was truly a wonderful, wonderful half hour.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you. Be with us next week. Yeah.